Welcome to the second episode of the Hali Hewa Podcast with your host, Abigael Kima. This podcast brings together key African players in the climate space to simply share their personal experiences as they advocate for climate justice in their unique capacities. Our guest today is an inspiration. From Mali, he is among the most celebrated climate scientists in Africa. Professor Youba Sokona is the Vice Chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, a United Nations body providing regular assessments of the impacts, future risks, and options for mitigating and adapting to climate change. He has over 40 years of experience addressing energy, environment, and sustainable development in Africa. He has a proven track record of organizational leadership and management, for example, as inaugural coordinator of the African Climate Policy Center and as Executive Secretary of the Sahara and the Sahel Observatory. In short, Professor Sokona is a global figure with deep technical knowledge, extensive policy experience, and an unreserved personal commitment to African-led development. Thank you so much for joining us today, Professor Youba. It's an honor to host you on the Hali Hewa Podcast. And I would just love to invite you to speak briefly about yourself and how you started your journey at the IPCC.
My journey at IPCC started back to the 90s and as a lead author. And at that time, climate change was not a biggest issue in Africa. I remember back to 1992, in the preparation of Rio Summit, I tried to catch the interest of African policymakers on climate issues. At that time, they said that, no, this is a Western issue. This is not an African issue. They better concentrate on the desertification. And rightly also, because the IPCC started looking at the science of climate at the same time on the economics of climate. Some of the issues that was in African concern was not was not captured in the IPCC assessment for a number of reasons, because of limited publication on those issues, because also of limited participation of scientists from the South, and particularly for Africa. And then through the process, I and some of my colleagues from Asia, Latin America, and throughout Africa, and then we look at how we can bring development issue at the fore of the climate discussion in the scientific discussion. And then we made some publication on some specialized review, particularly with the climate policy. And then we bring in the issue of equity, the issue of justice, and then the emphasis on adaptation along with mitigation. And then for the fifth assessment report, I was elected as co-chair of Working Group 3 in charge of mitigation. And since the sixth assessment cycle started in 2015, I was elected as vice chair of IPCC.
Well, that's really great to hear. I mean, what a journey. And I just want to know, has anything changed when it comes to participation of African scientists? Is there more involvement? Is there more representation of us from Africa and also Global South as well?
Certainly things have changed because there were very few limited participation of African in the IPCC process. Still now, Africa is a bit lagging behind because we need to increase the participation of Africa, which is why within the IPCC, we have initiated an outreach program linking with African Academy of Science and some universities in order to bring more African on board. There is a different way of participating in the IPCC assessment. First of all, as scientists, as academics, and then you need to publish papers in the African perspective, issues that are pertinent for the continent, because IPCC is not doing any research, it is assessing the literature. If there's no literature to be assessed, hardly IPCC can bring in. So my appeal is for African academia and then scientists, and then to publish papers on African issue and perspective. I initiated the process when I established the African Climate Policy Center, and then to bring African scholars publishing papers that will feature. And also, there is a need for the African academia and different stakeholders to comment different IPCC draft of the IPCC report, and then to point issues that are pertinent for the continent that is not very well articulated in the document. And then also the outreach aspect. That is very important. And for the center, I hope in the coming years, more and more African scientists will be part of the process. More and more policymakers also will be interested on the science of climate. This is the biggest problem. While the policymakers are attending the negotiation and they are interested in negotiation, they have very limited interest on science because the negotiation is based on the science. You cannot have a strong negotiation position if the science is not there. They go hand in hand. And I hope policymakers will pay more attention on IPCC and the science of climate.
Thank you so much. Well, there you have it. This is a call to have more Africans, especially in the academia, to, publish more papers that are for the African people, and the research is actually based on African context. Thank you so much for, sharing your journey in IPCC, and we are truly, truly inspired that we have a representation from you. So moving on to the next segment, and our topic today is an African perspective on the impacts of climate change. I know we've always described climate change in very complicated terms, and I know you are a scientist, so it might be difficult for you to actually break down everything, but in very simple terms, what is the situation at hand in terms of the impacts of climate change in Africa, and what is the future looking like? I know we've had a number of we no longer call them natural disasters because it has become too frequent. So yeah, what is the situation looking like, and what is the future looking like for us, especially in Africa?
Look, I will try to be simple, clear, and then to articulate issues that is all the people are aware. If we look at the climate impact in Africa, and then the biggest, and then the very well known by all the stakeholders, all the people in Africa, the biggest climate impact in Africa can be seen in the food, agricultural, and health sectors. And then with knock-on effect on poverty and the economy, migration, and conflict. If you look at, because livelihood of the majority of the African people are coming from agricultural sector and crops and, animal herding. And this is very important. And then this is where we have the clear impact on the food also system. And from the IPCC latest assessment report, and we have a clear indication that some of the oases in the Northern Africa has been abandoned. Oasis is related to agriculture, is related to herding, is related to livelihood. And then we have seen also in the pastoral lands across Africa, lower animal growth rates and productivity, and it has been observed. And we have seen also that farmers, if we take some specific cases, for instance, in Ethiopia, they lose about $200 per hectare through soil erosion. And we have seen also 1/3 of the people undernourished in sub-Saharan Africa. And then those are some of the key impacts, and then they are related to the daily life of the people. And we have noticed also that part of Africa have warmed by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. And it's between 1 and 3 degrees Celsius. And then we actually, at the global level, we are at 1 degree Celsius of warming. And in Africa, it's higher than that. And so the implication is that the increased exposure and vulnerability, and then the climate highlighted, strengthened some of the challenges the continent is facing in terms of poverty, in terms of vulnerability, in terms of job creation, in terms of conflict. Because some of the conflict, because, in many parts of Africa, herder and farmer were living in harmony. And then because of the shrinking of resources, and then because of the climate impact, and then they they get in conflict for access to some of the available natural resources. And then so that in nutshell, those are some of the things we have been observed in the African context. And to look at what the future look like, so if we look at the global climate change hotspots, and then we can see that largely all the continent, and then from the northern part through the western, the central, the eastern, and the southern part, all are climate hotspots. And then the majority of the climate hotspots are in Africa. And this is also indicating that some climate zones are shifting. The arid, dry area are growing and shifting, as already recorded in the Mediterranean, the Sahel, and Southern Africa. And then novel and impacted hot climate in the tropical zone and cooler zone also are shrinking and shifting to higher altitude and higher latitude.
Thank you so much for that. From the picture you have painted, it shows that it only gets worse from here. And I come from a community of farmers, so I know how important a stable climate is for us, because I went to school because my parents were able to sell farm produce to supplement their day job. So, it's a very sad state of affair. And another question that I really wanted to ask, we say a lot that Africa has contributed to just 4% of the global emissions, yes, yet we are the hardest hit. So what exactly does that mean?
That means, as I indicated, the continent is largely situated in low latitude, and then with fragile ecosystems. And that means, and also if we look at the level of development of the continent, and then we have limited infrastructure, we have limited, resources, and then a large part of the people, the community, rely on natural resources, as I indicated, for their livelihood. And then the rain-fed agriculture is the practice, because we have less than, say, if I become much more exaggerating, we have less than 10% of agricultural land irrigated. And many figures indicated between 6 and 7%. And that means the agricultural system is related to rain. If there is rain, we'll be in better position. No rain, will be in trouble. And then as actually with the climate issues is erratic, and this one critical element. And also, we said that in the urbanization is now accelerating in the African context. And then the rate and the pace of infrastructure in urban area is far, far lagging behind the more the people in urban area. And then this is why we have a lot of slums. And then with a lot of vulnerable people. And then if there is any increase of rainfall. And many people and living in Nairobi, you are familiar with that, with the flooding. And if there is drought also, they will face a problem of water shortage. And so it's a combination, and then the climate will come to add on many of the problems we'll be facing. And then unless we look at that, we know also that many of our development perspective is related to energy, and then particularly electricity. And then the availability and the consumption of electricity is very low. And in the household sector, and then a large part of the people are using charcoal and firewood for cooking. And now, if you look at, each of the capital cities in sub-Saharan Africa, take Nairobi, Bamako, Dakar, Abidjan, Ouagadougou, and then the charcoal and firewood are coming more and more farther from the urban area. And those are huge implications on land degradation, huge implication on health, because charcoal and firewood are generating black carbon that are harmful for the health of the woman and the children. It's a combination of different factors, and then that makes things much more worse.
Wow, that is such great insights. Because, as a young activist, you're always saying this, but finally today I have a clear picture of exactly what that means.
The point is that this is the situation, but this does not mean, is the situation hopeless, because it gives a huge opportunity because for the continent, and provided that we have a clear African narrative on climate. And then that starts with our development objective. And then how we make our development compatible with climate, and how we make it much more resilient. And taking, to revisit completely our agricultural system. And then particularly the small scale farming system. And then to define completely our energy system, and then our urbanization process. And then all those give to us a huge opportunity for the continent, and then to move toward a more sustainable, resilient future. And that is, we are preventing also the impact of climate.
This just shows that indeed climate change is cutting across all sectors. So it's no longer a problem that is only for the chosen few or those who are climate scientists or people who are in this field who need to care. Rather, it cuts across every sector. And that's why it's actually very important to have more people on board understanding exactly what the problem is and finding a solution together. Like you said, developing a different narrative for Africa, and also just going back to the drawing board and developing new development systems that will ensure we are building resilience, since climate is changing, and that's a fact for sure. And what would you say are the gaps that exist in addressing these impacts in Africa, to be specific, and what can we do within our communities to combat climate change? Because my understanding is we've had this system, the UNFCCC system that came about back in, it's been 26 years already, and a lot of the people from my community have really no understanding of exactly what is happening. So what would you say are the gaps in addressing this, and what can we do within our communities to ensure that we are building resilience by ourselves?
I think that you can do a lot. And if you look at different communities across the continent, they are very resilient, and then they know how to cope with climate variability. But what they cannot cope with is the climate change, because climate change and climate variability are quite different, because the herder, the farmers, and different communities, and then they know, and then they are sensitive. And it's very important and then for particularly the young activists in climate change issues, that to put an emphasis on educating people, informing people, and awareness raising in a continuous basis. And then we need in all our education systems, starting from the household sector, the home, and then to educate children, and then to be aware of what they are doing, what will be the implication. And then we need to look at the kindergarten, because the attitude, every single action matters. Every single emission of greenhouse gases matter. It is not because it's very small, but if we are sensitive, if we are educated, and then we will change our behavior. And then by changing the behavior, we'll have a huge implication. And then this is one element. Second element is that to have a dialogue with different policymakers. Unfortunately, in the African context, climate is seen as only environmental problem. Is Minister of Environment, or climate is seen only climate science, purely science. The physical science of climate is the meteorological department. It's much more bigger and wider than that. And then it's very important, as I indicated, and then to look at development agenda from the community level, and then to at the national level, and then to make it, to screen it, and then to make it compatible with the climate. And this is an option. And to look at, if as I indicated, we are in a stage of building our energy system. And then how you make your energy system compatible with climate. That means you build a low carbon or zero carbon energy system, and then how you feed that in the critical sector. As I indicated, I said that is only 6 to 7% of land that are irrigated. And actually, with the level of development of renewable, particularly solar, and then it can feed, it can energize our small-scale farming system. It can energize the food related to our agricultural system. Because if you change from the rain-fed system to irrigation, you will increase the production, the productivity. If you increase the production to productivity, you will have to transform, you will have to store, you will have to process, and then all those will require energy. That will require for creating jobs. It's an indication. If we look at, I said that many people are moving from the rural area to urban area. It's because since the structural adjustment program started, we pay less attention in the rural economy. We just say only farming, but you have to revisit the rural economy. And then how you energize the rural economy, and then how you make it much more attractive. Because why people are moving from the rural area to urban area? Because they are aspiring for a better living condition, for a much more better well-being. If they can't have that in rural area, in our economy, they will never leave it. And there is a way of bringing those different elements. In the urban area, the new stock of housing we are building is much more important than the existing stock. It's a bit shocking, a person like me, to see that a large part of our housing system is based on concrete, on cement, which is one of the most polluting sector. While we do have a huge variety of opportunities, and then we need to bring in engineers, to bring in scientists, and then to bring in artisans who better understand, who better know those different technologies, and then to make it, climate-friendly housing system. As I indicated, we are seeing increase of temperature across the different part of the continent. If you build in concrete, in cement, you will have air conditioning. And then the energy you will put in the air conditioning, because many people are living in urban area, that will be not available for people who need for farming. So no, we can bring in also the inequality issue at the national level. We can bring in the equity dimension, and then we can bring in the justice dimension also.
What I am gathering from this conversation is that energy is a key recipe in charting a new path for development and building resilience for Africa. And yeah, that's a quite powerful insights. And thank you so much for, the amazing, wonderful insights that you have given, being that you have quite an experience when it comes to sustainable development, energy, and climate in Africa. And so we are finally moving to the last segment of this podcast, which is the call to action for COP27. So the world is looking at Egypt, who are the hosts for this year's COP, being that it's happening in Africa, and we all agree that we ought to have a shared narrative of what our expectations are for COP27, thus representing a united front to ensure that our communities get justice, being among the people who are living in context of vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. So as Professor Youba Sokona, what are your expectations for COP27 this year, and what would you identify as key priority issues for Africa?
I think that we go to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt with a clear understanding of the science, because IPCC has produced a huge amount of report looking at various aspects during the 6th assessment cycle. We produced a special report on land and climate, on desertification and climate, agricultural and food difference system. We produced a special report on ocean, cryosphere, and climate. And then we produced the 3 volumes of the IPCC regular assessment report from the climate science basis on vulnerability, adaptation, and impact, and then on mitigation. And I think from that, and then the special report also on 1.5, what came out from those is we need at the global level a fundamental changes, a transition in all aspects of the society. And then looking at 4 critical sectors: energy, as you already indicated, land, including agriculture, urban and infrastructure, including the transport, and industrial sector. And it's very important that I think for Africa, going to Sharm el-Sheikh, that could be a starting point of a very well articulated African narrative that could go beyond the mitigation adaptation divide, that go beyond some of the element inside that, and then to take climate change out of the lens of environment and then to put at the heart of the development in the continent. And then to put the development at the fore, and how we make that compatible with climate. And then that will give us a new avenue, a new perspective, a new hopes. And that's my dream for Sharm el-Sheikh, being a new departure. And then by looking at also those critical sectors, and then to make them compatible. But that will not happen if we are not convincing our partners, and then from the industrialized sector, and then for the finance, and then to make sure that the finance is available. And then we need also to make sure that the African science on climate is informing the policies in the continent, and then from the local to the national and the regional level. I do hope that we will take concrete actions starting for Sharm el-Sheikh based on the African own narrative, and then to stick on that.
So putting climate change at the heart of development in Africa through collaboration, through education. I mean, what a nice way of wrapping this up. Thank you so much for being part of this podcast. Those are such great insights, and I hope that this will be impactful and quite educative to the general public who are in different sectors, and ensuring that they understand they have a huge role to play in ensuring we chart a new path for development in Africa while incorporating climate and energy, because those are two key recipes in ensuring that communities within Africa are catered for and get justice for everything that they do. Thank you so much, Professor.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to the Hali Hewa Podcast. Please subscribe and follow this podcast on all our social media platforms at Hali Hewa Podcast. Until next time, bye.